Hey there, self-care warriors. Welcome back to Self-Care Haven. I wanted to continue the series that I started a few days ago regarding the differences between the highs and lows of a normal relationship versus one with narcissistic abuse. Now, I want to preface this by saying that we all have wounds, we all have triggers, we all have insecurities and flaws. And breakups happen for a number of reasons, some of which have nothing at all to do with abuse or narcissistic abuse. Breakups happen every day for a whole different criteria of dysfunction that has nothing to do with narcissistic abuse. There's all sorts of conflicts involved. Life is messy. People break up. But narcissistic abuse is different, because it is a form of psychological and emotional and sometimes even physical and sexual manipulation where the victim's identity is eroded. And what I mean by this is that the perpetrator, whether they're a narcissist, a sociopath, or a psychopath, basically sets out to demean and belittle every facet of the victim's identity until they no longer have a sense of self. And that's usually because the disordered personality views any source of supply, any victim that they're in a relationship with or an interaction with, as an extension of themselves. They're just an object to be used, devalued, and discarded. And that point of view, as you can tell, does not lead to some sort of healthy conflict that can be resolved or learned from in the relationship. It leads to a great deal of narcissistic injury and rage, especially if the victim dares to threaten or challenge the perpetrator's sense of entitlement, their sense of control, their power, their false sense of superiority in any way. When we think about healthy conflict in normal relationships, we think about something, an agreement, a disagreement that basically arises due to differences in perspectives or identities of the two partners. But in a narcissistically abusive relationship, the victim is not allowed to have an identity. So any difference basically arising from the narcissist's crazy idea that the victim is an extension of that narcissist and an object to be controlled and manipulated and destroyed, basically that sort of thinking leads to a great deal of narcissistic injury and rage, where the victim is made to walk on eggshells. They're not allowed to have a sense of self. They're not allowed to have a sense of identity. That identity is continually eroded, especially during the devaluation and discard phases. And this is done for the narcissist's benefit. The narcissist feels pleasure and power and control when that happens, because they have been able to manufacture that chaos, that internal and external chaos in the relationship as well as within the victim, as the victim starts to internalize all of the demeaning and belittling acts and words that the narcissist has fed the victim. And she or he believes in the falsehoods of the narcissist. And what ends up happening is that that victim starts to have a great deal of anxiety. They start to have symptoms of even PTSD. They might even feel suicidal. They start to have all of these emotions and this overwhelming sense that they are helpless and paralyzed in the relationship. And this type of paralysis is very different from the normal highs and lows of a regular relationship with a non-disordered partner. In a regular relationship, you can count on your partner to not want to hurt you intentionally. In a narcissistically abusive relationship, your disordered partner is guaranteed intending to hurt you. They're intending to hurt you so that they can regain control. Now, the extent to which they gain pleasure from this, I guess, depends on the specific narcissist, but the majority of narcissists do get a sense of power and joy out of manipulating others and using others, because, again, they see their victims as extensions of themselves. So, when we think about narcissistic injury and we think about narcissistic rage, And we think about that and the difference between that and healthy conflict in a relationship. Healthy conflict can be used, as I said in the last video, as a medium for personal transformation. The two partners work together to resolve the conflict and work through it. They might even decide that they need to evolve outside of the relationship, so they need to break up, or they need to work through it together as a couple. Whatever they decide, it's still a sense of personal transformation. It lends them a sense of growth. Whereas in a narcissistically abusive relationship, there will be very little growth. In fact, there will be destruction. There will be a great deal of destruction psychologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially. The victim is under the complete control of the narcissistic abuser, because in the idealization phase, the perpetrator and the predator, whatever you want to call the disordered person, grooms their victim to expect a great deal of affection, a great deal of attention and love. And once they're done grooming, and once they've hooked that victim into the relationship, and once they've basically convinced the victim that they're a good person and they're trustworthy, and once they've convinced the victim to invest in the relationship, that's when they start to devalue. That's when they start to erode the victim's identity. And it can start small in very covert ways, and then it incrementally gets worse and worse over time. The victim becomes conditioned to expect less and less and less, while giving more and more and more of his or her effort. And this type of conditioning from the narcissist actually works to extinguish behaviors that the narcissist doesn't want the victim to engage in. For example, if the victim has a great social life, the narcissistic partner may start to condition the victim into expecting and associating going out with narcissistic rage. So whenever the victim is trying to go out with friends, the narcissist may engage in a belittling argument right before they go out. They might leave the victim crying right before they go out. They might do all sorts of things to manipulate the victim and condition the victim in order to make sure that the victim does not have any independence outside of them. So it is really a ploy to make sure that the victim associates any sort of joyful actions that they have in their life, any sort of hobbies or interests, or basically things that give the victim power and independence. They condition that victim into thinking that and associating with that positive experience with a negative abusive one, so that the victim feels less in control, they feel less independent, they feel as if their whole identity, their whole life is being dismantled and dissected and devalued by the narcissist. When a narcissist rages, that is incredibly different from a normal couple having an argument. And even in the worst of arguments, both partners will probably feel remorse and empathy for each other's emotions, whatever might come up. However, in a narcissistically abusive relationship, the narcissist doesn't just have a flaw or an insecurity or is simply defensive about something. We're all defensive. Everyone is defensive about something. The narcissist is defensive about everything. They will start to rage over seemingly very small, irrelevant things. They will gaslight and project so that the victim feels at fault for whatever the narcissist is angry about. And they will make sure that the victim feels as small and worthless as possible when they're raging. And this is, again, meant to erode the victim's sense of identity, their sense of control and power and independence. They feel so belittled and demeaned by the narcissist that they feel like they can't live without the narcissist, because even though the narcissist is the one traumatizing them, they also gain comfort from the narcissist. The narcissist is able to make up for whatever trauma they've caused, or they seem to make it up by showing some remorse or using some intermittent reinforcement of positive behaviors dispersed throughout the cycle of abuse in order to keep the victim on their toes and hoping that it'll go right back to the idealization phase, which it never does. Not fully anyways. I mean, there is that aspect of them hoovering in order to re-idealize you, just to put you through an even more horrific discard than the first discard. But otherwise, it is really done to control the victim. It's not a conflict that arises organically. It's not a conflict that arises naturally as a result of two different perspectives or two different people with two different identities. It's a result of the narcissist trying to dismantle your identity. It's a result of the narcissist trying to manufacture chaos. It's a result of the narcissist's injury and their wound, which is a gaping wound that can never be filled by anyone or anything. And whatever has happened to the narcissist to make them that way, whether it's biology, whether it's environment, whether it's a combination of both, and I personally believe it's a combination of both, it happened way before the victim ever entered the picture. So the victim is never at fault for the narcissist's rage, whereas in a normal relationship where there's two people who don't have any disorder, what's often happening is that one person may be more at fault for something and they'll take accountability for it, or both people might be co-creating poor communication or misunderstandings, but they'll work through it together, whether it means that they have to break up or whether it means that they resolve it together and continue the relationship. They're not trying to necessarily hurt each other or harm each other in any way, whereas the narcissistic partner has no qualms, has no moral qualms about regaining power and control by harming that other partner. They need to erode that victim's identity. It's almost like it's their life source. The victim's trauma feeds the narcissist, whereas in a normal relationship, the trauma that arises if either partner has a traumatic background, that is something that both partners will probably have to communicate about and work through and resolve together and find ways to better communicate. In a narcissistically abusive relationship, communication by default is impossible with the narcissist because, again, the narcissist has that gaping wound, that narcissistic injury, that any slight poke, anything that threatens their sense of control, superiority, entitlement is enough to evoke their rage. And again, this is completely also manufactured in a sense because they can put on different masks at any point. They can basically stop abusing someone as soon as there's a witness. They can put on the mask as soon as there's a witness. They can switch masks so easily that you know that their behavior is deliberate and it is under their conscious control. Even if it is reflexive in a certain way because it's ingrained in them to become defensive as soon as there's, the slightest little poke at their injury, it's still conscious to an extent because they are able to stop. They are able to stop when someone else enters the picture. If there's ever a witness, they're able to go back to their charming self. And it's completely deliberate. It is deliberate. Even if it is reflexive, it's not that it being reflexive takes away accountability for their behavior because it's both reflexive and defensive and deliberate at the same time. It's under their conscious control. So even if it's a behavioral pattern that's been ingrained within them, it's still something that they can consciously control, something that they can step back, look at, and try to change, but they choose not to. So I hope this helps in putting into perspective some of the differences between normal healthy relationships and narcissistically abusive relationships. So in a normal healthy relationship, again, conflict is not manufactured, chaos is not manufactured. It arises organically and naturally if it has to, and it's usually resolved by both partners evolving within the relationship or outside of it if they choose to end the relationship. In a narcissistically abusive relationship, that chaos is manufactured by the narcissist. It's created through this type of manipulation of gaslighting, projection, smear campaigns, disappearances, silent treatments, triangulation, covert and overt put-downs, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, spiritual abuse. It's manufactured by that narcissist. And it's used to control the victim's identity. It's used to dismantle their sense of self, their independence, and it's used to employ their false sense of entitlement and really bolster their sense of false superiority. So I hope that puts into perspective those differences, because if you ever do come across anyone who tells you that, oh, you're just blaming your partner, you should be taking accountability, it takes two to tango, or whatever victim blaming crap that they're going to throw at you, remember to ground yourself in the reality that narcissistic abuse has nothing to do with shared accountability. An abuser is an abuser. An abuser abuses the victim. The accountability belongs to the perpetrator, the abuser. And the accountability and the blame should rightfully be owned by the abuser. Of course, the abuser will never take accountability usually, but remember to ground yourself in that reality. There is a difference between conflict that is co-created in a healthy relationship that arises organically and naturally versus abuse that is inflicted upon a victim to control, to demean, to devalue, and to erode that victim's identity. So I hope this helps validate you, empower you. I hope it helps to inform. If you want to share this video, please do, so that other people can get a little bit more informed about narcissistic abuse, whether or not they're in an abusive relationship. And hopefully we can continue to change the discourse and co-create this revolution. I'll talk to you very soon, and I hope to continue this series. And until then, take care.